It wasn't just a horror film. It was a neon-drenched hallucination stitched together with rotting pages from forgotten comic books. Creepshow wasn't content with scaring you, it wanted to crawl inside your nostalgia and tear it apart panel by panel. Directed by George A. Romero and written by Stephen King at the height of his imaginative madness, Creepshow is often remembered as a quirky horror anthology, an oddball tribute to EC Comics. But what hides beneath its pulpy surface is a patchwork of strange decisions, suppressed gore, secret cameos, and eerie parallels between fiction and real-life obsession. Stephen King didn't just write the script. He inserted himself literally into the madness, playing a backwoods yokel slowly dissolving into moss. The film's saturated lighting wasn't just for style, it was a rebellion against horror norms, pushing boundaries the censors weren't ready for. And in the background, something even stranger was happening. Children of horror royalty appearing on screen, personal superstitions woven into set designs, and stories that mirrored disturbing truths. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Creepshow, 1,982, and some of them were never meant to be found. Fact 1. The day Stephen King ate the meteorite. Stephen King didn't just write Creepshow, he stepped in front of the camera and became a glowing, moss-covered punchline. In the segment The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, King played the title character, a dim-witted farmer who finds a meteorite and makes the worst decision imaginable, touching it. What most people don't know is that the role was written specifically for King. Romero believed no other actor could capture the blend of goofy and tragic, quite like the horror author himself. King threw himself into the role with manic energy, channeling his childhood love for B-movie schlock. The result? A performance that was equal parts cartoon and collapse. But here's the catch. Stephen King reportedly insisted on not washing his face between takes, letting the green makeup and fake molds seep in for hours. Why? He claimed it made the hallucination feel real. Some crew members later said they weren't sure if King was acting or just unraveling. So when you watch Jordy Verrill slowly transform into a moss creature, remember, that's not just acting. That's Stephen King consuming his own madness, one glowing rock at a time. Fact 2. The lights were too loud. Creepshow is remembered for its vivid color palette, saturated reds, blues, and greens that scream comic book surrealism. But those colors weren't just filters or post-production tricks. The crew used custom-built lighting rigs that were so intense, actors complained of headaches and blurred vision on set. Cinematographer Michael Gornick worked with Romero to design a visual style that mimicked EC Comics panels. Every frame had to look like it could be printed on a pulp magazine cover. That meant backlighting actors with pure neon, flooding sets with gel-covered lights, and using extreme color contrast to signal emotional spikes. Some scenes were almost painful to shoot. Ted Danson, who starred in the segment Something to Tide You Over, said his eyeballs felt sunburned after multiple takes in underwater green lighting. At one point, Romero had to halt filming because an actor's contact lens began melting under the heat. Ironically, what made the film visually iconic nearly blinded its stars, but the sacrifice paid off. Decades later, Creepshow still burns its imagery into your brain because it nearly burned through theirs. Fact 3. The Lost Gore Reel. Behind every horror classic lies a trail of censorship, and Creepshow was no different. While the final cut is playful and grotesque in equal measure, early test screenings were reportedly far more brutal. Entire gore sequences were slashed before release, not for narrative reasons, but to appease the MPAA. Romero originally included close-up shots of decapitations, insect-ridden wounds, and dismemberments that pushed the film toward an X rating. Some of the most extreme effects were practical builds by legendary FX artist Tom Savini, who was furious when they were trimmed. In fact, he referred to the MPAA as butchers with a blue pencil. Rumors persist of a lost gore reel, a bootleg cut featuring every censored frame. Savini has hinted it may still exist in private hands. A few frames occasionally pop up at horror conventions, traded like contraband. No full copy has ever surfaced. So, if you think Creepshow is campy but tame, remember, the version you saw was the sanitized one. Somewhere out there, a dirtier, bloodier cut might still be lurking in someone's basement, waiting to be reanimated. Fact 4. Joe Hill was the first victim. Before he became a best-selling author in his own right, Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, made his screen debut in Creepshow. He was just 10 years old when he played the boy in the wraparound segments, the comic-obsessed kid punished by his father for reading trash. To most viewers, it's a throwaway role, but there's more beneath the surface. That opening scene wasn't just a narrative device, it was personal mythology. King wrote it as a twisted homage to his own childhood when his babysitter locked him in a closet for reading comics like Tales from the Crypt. And casting his son wasn't coincidence, it was ritual. On set, Romero reportedly gave young Joe unusual direction. Don't just act scared, act betrayed. The result was eerie. In his brief moments on screen, Hill channels something raw, unchildlike. Some crew members later said he looked like he understood the entire film, even if he didn't. Today, Joe Hill writes horror fiction eerily similar to Creepshow. Maybe because it wasn't just his debut, it was his initiation. Fact 5. The roaches were real. In the infamous segment, They're Creeping Up on You, a cruel germaphobe is overrun by a swarm of cockroaches in his sterilized penthouse. The scene ends with the bugs bursting from his body. It's disgusting, it's legendary, and it's completely real. Over 20,000 live cockroaches were used during filming, imported from a special insect supplier in New York. Handling them was a nightmare. The bugs kept escaping, dying under hot lights, and vanishing into walls. The crew had to rent a separate apartment unit just to house and monitor them. Worse, the final scene involved the actor lying on a prosthetic chest cavity filled with live roaches. When it burst open, the insects spilled onto the actor's real skin. Romero only got one take because no one was willing to do it again. The smell reportedly lingered for days, and despite dozens of exterminations, the roaches never fully left the studio. The horror wasn't just on camera. It crawled into the cracks and stayed. Fact 6. A real corpse on set? In the Father's Day segment, a long-dead patriarch rises from the grave, craving revenge and cake. The corpse, played by actor John Lormer, was layered with latex rot, soil, and oozing makeup that took hours to apply. But some crew members swear they used more than just prosthetics to achieve that smell. Rumors swirled for years that real cemetery dirt and decaying animal matter were used to enhance the realism of the grave scenes. Romero's team never confirmed it, but makeup artist Tom Savini once let slip that they wanted the actors to gag naturally. Even stranger, one production assistant reportedly refused to return to set after working on the grave-digging scene, claiming the stench was not makeup, it was death. He never worked in film again. While it's never been proven that a real corpse or parts of one were involved, the segment's authenticity lingers. The decay felt too visceral, too specific. Maybe it's just method horror, or maybe Creepshow got too close to the dead. Fact 7. The segment that predicted King's own accident. In The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, Stephen King's character descends into madness after touching a meteorite that contaminates his body. He becomes overgrown, isolated, and ends his life with a shotgun to the head, surrounded by invasive green moss. What's chilling is how eerily prophetic this segment would become. Years after Creepshow, King was struck by a van while walking along a rural road in Maine. The accident left him seriously injured, isolated during recovery, and plagued with hallucinations from painkillers. In interviews, King admitted that during those months, he felt like Jordy Verrill, mutating into something unrecognizable. Even stranger, the segment ends with a radio announcer forecasting rain, implying that the contamination will spread across the countryside. Some horror fans have speculated this was a subconscious metaphor for King's later struggles with addiction, pain, and fame. Was the character a joke or a warning from his own imagination? Fact 8. Adrienne Barbeau was told to scream louder, and then some. In The Crate, Adrienne Barbeau plays Wilma, a shrill, domineering wife who meets a grisly end at the hands of a crate-dwelling creature. Her performance was intentionally over the top, designed to make audiences secretly root for her demise. But what happened behind the scenes was far more intense. Director Romero reportedly pushed Barbeau to crank it up to 11, encouraging her to deliver dialogue as if she were a parody of every bad spouse ever written. But when it came time for her death scene, the director took it further. He wanted real fear. Barbeau later revealed that she was never shown the full animatronic monster until the camera rolled. Her scream in that moment? Completely genuine. She wasn't acting, she was startled. And for Romero, that was the point. Creepshow wasn't just about scares. It was about manipulating the line between performance and panic. Fact 9. Tom Savini slept with the dead. Tom Savini is often hailed as the godfather of practical horror FX. On Creepshow, he was in his element designing exploding heads, reanimated corpses, and swarms of bugs. But his dedication bordered on obsessive. According to several crew members, Savini refused to leave set during the filming of They're Creeping Up on You. He allegedly slept in the same room where the cockroach explosion sequence was staged because he wanted to understand how the bugs behaved at night. He also kept prototype corpses in his hotel room to fine-tune lighting effects. One maid quit after finding a half-decomposed dummy propped up in the bathroom. Savini claimed it was all for realism, but others whispered that he was too comfortable around the dead. One actor even asked for a different makeup artist because Savini smiled too much when things bled. He wasn't just building monsters, he was living among them. Fact 10. The crate was a real museum prop. The monstrous crate in the segment The Crate wasn't built from scratch. It was a repurposed prop, borrowed from a real natural history museum in Pittsburgh. Its label, Arctic Expedition 1834, was historically accurate, taken from an actual expedition crate that once stored preserved animal specimens. Romero and his team wanted authenticity, but borrowing an object tied to actual scientific history brought strange energy to the set. Crew members claimed the crate was unusually cold to the touch, even under hot lights. Others said the hinges creaked differently each day, as if the box adjusted to being filmed. Things got weirder. During filming, the fog machines malfunctioned only when pointed at the crate. Electrical failures followed. One grip refused to touch it after seeing a shadow move inside when no one was near it. Was it just production stress? Or did the crate carry more than just wood and nails from 1834? The monster was fiction, but the container, it had a history of its own. Fact 11. The censors had a favorite segment. When Creepshow was submitted to the MPAA for rating, censors flagged multiple scenes for excessive gore and suggested cuts. But curiously, they had no issue with one of the most disturbing entries, something to tide you over. In the story, a vengeful man buries two lovers up to their necks on a beach and lets the tide drown them. There's minimal blood, but the psychological terror is suffocating. Ted Danson's wide-eyed panic as the water rises remains one of the film's most haunting images. So why did the censors leave it untouched? According to Romero, the MPAA reviewer told him, "It's terrifying, but it's also classy." The implication? Violence done with clever staging and high emotion was more acceptable than cheap gore. Ironically, it's the only segment that horror critics consistently list as too real to enjoy. Sometimes, the most brutal acts don't need blood to leave scars. Fact 12. The meteor Shay times T became a meme before memes existed. One line in Creepshow became a cult phenomenon years before the internet gave it legs. In The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, Stephen King's character stares at the glowing meteorite and mutters, "Meteor shit," an exclamation so bizarre, it looped from horror to comedy and back again. The line wasn't in the original script. King improvised it during a take when the prop meteor cracked too early. Romero loved the absurdity and kept it in. Over the years, fans latched onto the phrase. It began appearing on bootleg t-shirts, bathroom graffiti at horror conventions, and even as a catchphrase shouted during midnight screenings. In the early 2000s, horror forums and Reddit threads canonized it as the most quotable nonsense in horror. What was meant as a throwaway joke became a meme before memes were even a thing. And unlike most internet trends, this one was organic, grown wild from the cult soil of Creepshow. Meteor shit, indeed. Fact 13. Leslie Nielsen was too good at buying evil. Known for his comedic genius in Airplane and The Naked Gun, Leslie Nielsen wasn't the obvious choice for a sadistic villain. Yet in Something to Tide You Over, he plays a cold, calculating man who buries his cheating wife and her lover alive, then calmly watches them drown. Nielsen's performance is chilling, but what's most disturbing is how natural it felt. On set, Nielsen reportedly stayed in character between takes. He would smile politely, offer coffee to cast members, and then quietly rehearse lines about revenge and suffocation. Ted Danson later admitted he wasn't sure where Leslie stopped and the character began. But here's the kicker. Nielsen brought his infamous portable fart machine to set, a prank tool he used in most of his comedy films. During lunch breaks, he'd use it to break tension, then immediately go back to playing a man who murders people with beach shovels. The duality was unsettling. The cast joked that Creepshow was the moment comedy turned cannibal, and Nielsen devoured the role with terrifying ease. Fact 14. The EC Comics lawsuit that never happened. Creepshow is a direct love letter to EC Comics, down to its title font, animated transitions, and morally ironic stories. But Romero and King never licensed the EC name. They paid tribute, but never got permission. So why wasn't there a lawsuit? Turns out, EC Comics had long been defunct by 1982, and the rights were tangled in legal limbo. The surviving holders reportedly saw the film and chose not to sue. Why? Because Creepshow wasn't exploitation, it was adoration. In fact, a few former EC artists praised the film publicly, saying it understood the tone better than any copycat. Some even reached out to Romero, thanking him for reviving their spirit of horror justice. Instead of a courtroom battle, Creepshow became a cultural bridge, reviving the EC aesthetic for a new generation. And in doing so, it outlived the very thing it imitated. Fact 15. The ashtray that appears in every segment. There's one item that sneaks through the entire film, a seemingly mundane white ceramic ashtray. Most viewers miss it, but it appears in every single segment, including the wraparound story. Romero used it as a kind of visual Easter egg, a way to connect the stories subconsciously. The ashtray changes context, resting on a desk, a nightstand, a lab table, even near the comic book pages themselves. Why an ashtray? According to producer Richard Rubinstein, it belonged to Romero's late mother, including it was Romero's private ritual, a way of keeping her presence on every set he worked on. Creepshow was the only film where he placed it in every vignette, as if she was watching each story unfold. It wasn't just a prop, it was a ghost, and it's always there, hiding in plain sight. Fact 16. The animation was an afterthought. One of Creepshow's signature elements is its vibrant comic book animation, the swirling panels, page-turn transitions, and neon splashes that separate each segment. They feel central to the film's identity, but surprisingly, they were not part of the original plan. During principal photography, Romero focused purely on live-action storytelling. It wasn't until post-production that he and editor Pasquale Buba realized something was missing: a tonal glue to unify the anthology. The solution? Add animation that mimicked the comic book framing of EC horror. The animation team was assembled late, working under intense deadlines. Artists had to recreate scenes in panel form after they were already shot, matching camera angles and color palettes exactly. Some frames were rotoscoped over real footage, others were stylized to exaggeration. And here's the twist: the animation ended up influencing the final sound design retroactively. Certain musical stings and sound effects were remixed to match the animated transitions, reversing the normal editing order. What started as an afterthought became the heartbeat of Creepshow. The film didn't just imitate a comic book, it became one frame by glowing frame. Fact 17. The one story that was too dark to film. Not every story made it into Creepshow. One tale written by Stephen King himself was cut before shooting began. It centered on a group of children who trap their abusive camp counselor in a cabin, then burn it to the ground with him inside. No monsters, no magic, just vengeance. Romero loved the script, but producers balked. The tone was too real, too cruel, and risked pushing the film beyond playful horror into psychological trauma. The segment was shelved and never filmed. King later repurposed parts of the story into his short fiction, but the original version remains unpublished. Rumors persist that early drafts included drawings of the cabin, and that the script ended with the children smiling as the fire raged. In a film filled with zombies and meteorites, this was the one monster that hit too close to home. Sometimes horror isn't in the supernatural, it's in what kids learn from grown-ups. Fact 18. The score that got buried. Creepshow's eerie, synth-heavy score is often credited to composer John Harrison, who went on to direct Tales from the Dark Side. But the version you hear in the final film, it's not exactly what he wrote. During early cuts, Romero used temporary music from old sci-fi B-movies to set the tone. When Harrison submitted his original score more orchestral, less retro, the producers felt it lacked the comic book vibe. At the last minute, Harrison had to rewrite nearly everything with a Moog synthesizer and cheap reverb, mimicking the temp tracks. Some of the discarded cues were darker, more melancholic. One was written specifically for Father's Day, a mournful piano melody that never made it in. Decades later, a limited vinyl release included these unused tracks. Fans were stunned at how much emotional weight had been stripped out. The Creepshow we know is punchy and weird, but underneath, there was once a version that wanted you to feel something deeper and was buried under neon and nostalgia. Fact 19. The set that flooded overnight. During the filming of Something to Tide You Over, the production crew built a custom beach set with hydraulic traps and buried piping to simulate high tide effect. It was elaborate, complete with sand shipped in from Delaware and a seawall engineered to collapse safely. But the ocean had other plans. One night, a storm surge hit the coast unexpectedly, flooding the entire set and destroying the camera tracks. Electrical gear was soaked, the artificial graves were lost under sludge, and worst of all, The buried restraints used to anchor actors during drowning scenes were dragged out to sea. Shooting was delayed for days. Ted Danson later joked that The Atlantic rewrote the script, but Romero saw it differently. He reportedly stood in the flooded set and whispered, "That's what revenge looks like." When the scene was finally reshot, the actors weren't faking their discomfort. The water was freezing, the sand was unstable, and everything reeked of salt and mildew. The ocean had played its part, and it left behind more than just seaweed. Fact 20. The film's rotten heart was preserved. Prop master Daryl Ferrucci was responsible for one of Creepshow's most iconic images, the rotting, candle-lit birthday cake in Father's Day. Made from real frosting mixed with latex and food dye, the cake looked disgusting because it was. After filming Wrapped, Ferrucci didn't discard the prop. Instead, he kept it in a sealed case in his garage, calling it his masterpiece. Over the years, the cake began to rot for real. The frosting hardened like bone. The food coloring grew mold. And yet, he refused to throw it away. When interviewed for the film's 25th anniversary, Ferrucci brought it out for the cameras. It had blackened, cracked, and was swarming with fungus. But it was still recognizably the same cake, the one that had sat atop the undead patriarch's table. "I guess," Ferrucci said with a grin, "some horror never dies." It wasn't just a prop anymore, it was a relic. A heart still beating just slower, and far more foul. Bonus fact, the Creeper was watching you too. Most fans remember the Creeper, the ghastly host who appears in animated form to introduce and close Creepshow, echoing the tradition of the Crypt Keeper from EC Comics. But few realize that the Creeper wasn't confined to the page or screen. In a handful of theatrical prints shown during the original 1982 run, audiences reported an unlisted post-credit flicker, a split-second frame of the Creeper's eyes, staring directly out from the darkness. It wasn't present in home video releases. It wasn't listed in production notes, and the studio never acknowledged it. Projectionists in New Jersey and Arizona claimed they saw it too just once during test screenings. Some speculated Romero had spliced it in as an in-joke. Others believed it was a defective reel, but the rumor persisted. The Creeper was watching from beyond the edit. Years later, a rare 35mm print surfaced at a horror archive. Frame-by-frame analysis showed a single subliminal image, barely a quarter of a second long eyes, distorted by film grain, staring wide. Was it a prank? An accident? Or did Romero leave behind one last frame, just for you? Some films end when the credits roll. Creepshow never really ended. It just waits on the shelf, in the comic, in the crawl space of your memory, until you're ready to look closer. So, which fact buried itself deepest under your skin? Which part felt like more than just fiction? Tell us in the comments what disturbed you most and what hidden horror we should uncover next. And if you're still not sure if someone or something is watching you, check again, carefully.